Let's hear the question from this very low-rated anchor.
And right there, you already knew what was coming. CNN steps up to the mic, fully loaded, with zero facts and a narrative that collapses on contact. Kaitlan Collins, who's supposed to be the network's serious face, decides to ask why President Trump deported an MS-13 gang member. You heard that right. Not why he was let in, not why he was here illegally. No, why he was deported.
Let's hear the question from this very low-rated anchor at CB.
Thank you, President. Do you plan to ask President Bukele to help return the man who your administration says was mistakenly deported? The man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador?
Well, let me ask Pam, would you answer that question?
Sure, President. First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, two courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country.
Stephen Miller, wait a minute. Can you just also respond to that question? Because, you know, it's asked by CNN and they always ask it with a slant because they're totally slanted because they don't know what's happening. That's why nobody's watching them. But would you answer that question also, please?
Yes, gladly. So, as Pam mentioned, there's an illegal alien from El Salvador. So, with respect to you, he's a citizen of El Salvador. So, it's very arrogant even for American media to suggest that we would even tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens as a starting point. As two immigration courts found that he was a member of MS-13. When President Trump declared MS-13 to be a foreign terrorist organization, that meant that he was no longer eligible under federal law, which I'm sure you know, you're very familiar with the INA, that he was no longer eligible for any form of immigration relief in the United States. So he had a deportation order that was valid, which meant that under our law, he's not even allowed to be present in the United States and had to be returned because of the foreign terrorist designation. This issue was then, by a district court judge, completely inverted, and a district court judge tried to tell the administration that they had to kidnap a citizen of El Salvador and fly him back here. That issue was raised to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the district court order was unlawful, and its main components were reversed 9-0 unanimously, stating clearly that neither Secretary of State nor the President could be compelled by anybody to forcibly retrieve a citizen of El Salvador from El Salvador, who again is a member of MS-13, which, as I'm sure you understand, rapes little girls, murders women, murders children, is engaged in the most barbaric activities in the world. And I can promise you, if he was your neighbor, you would move right away.
Okay, so you can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm supposed to not suggesting that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's always
how can I smuggle? How can I return him to the United States? Like I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it.
Marco, do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, Stephen outlined it. I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin, except for Venezuela that wasn't refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President, no, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story.
And that's what the Supreme Court held, by the way, to Marco's point. The Supreme Court said exactly what Marco said, that no court has the authority to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. We won a case 9-0, and people like CNN are portraying it as a loss, as usual, because they want foreign terrorists in the country who kidnap women and children. But President Trump, his policy is foreign terrorists that are here illegally get expelled from the country, which, by the way, is a 90-10 issue.
Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago, and they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You know, you have no credibility. Please go ahead.
All right, where do we even start? That wasn't a press conference. That was a public execution of a CNN narrative in 5 acts. Act 1, Pam Bondi, calm, precise, professional. She lays out the facts like it's a first-year immigration seminar. The guy was here illegally, identified as MS-13. Multiple courts ruled against him, and the only thing stopping him from staying deported is paperwork from El Salvador. CNN hears all that and goes, wait, did you say accidentally deported? Act 2, Stephen Miller, Homeland Security Advisor and part-time legal wrecking ball. He drops a legal anvil. MS-13 equals terrorist designation equals zero immigration relief. A district judge tried to reverse it. The Supreme Court stomped it out, 9-0. Even the liberal justices were like, nah, that's dumb. And CNN's still clinging to this narrative like it's the last lifeboat on the Titanic. Act 3, Bukele. The president of El Salvador stares into the CNN void and says, you want me to smuggle a terrorist into the U.S.? This guy's building mega prisons for MS-13 and somehow understands American law better than Kaitlan Collins. That's where we're at. Act 4, Marco Rubio. He walks in like the substitute civics teacher and says, just a reminder, foreign policy is handled by the president, not by CNN and not by judges. Act 5, the finale. President Trump comes in like a battering ram and asks the obvious question, why can't you just say it's a good thing to deport criminals? That's why no one watches you anymore. You have no credibility. So there you have it. CNN came in swinging with a fake deportation story and left in shreds. Pam Bondi brought the receipts. Stephen Miller dropped a legal sledgehammer. President Bukele laughed in their face. Marco Rubio gave a free civics lesson. And President Trump, he ended it with a simple question. Why can't you just admit deporting criminals is a good thing? If you're tired of watching the media defend gang members like they're misunderstood exchange students, if you're sick of seeing CNN twist reality into some backwards sob story, then help me keep calling out this kind of nonsense, please. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who still thinks Kaitlan Collins is the voice of reason. And for more hard-hitting truth, every single day, visit steadfastandloyal.com. We expose the spin, we call out the games, and we're never afraid to name names. As always, stay informed, stay free, and stay steadfast and loyal. I'm Jimmy Parker. Thanks for joining us.